Hi everybody and welcome to today's MediaWorks Masterclass. Today we're going to be covering building a website for 2025 and beyond. My name's David Norris. I'm the Group Operations Director here at MediaWorks and often host these masterclasses where I get to learn about everything else that we're doing within the organisation, which is always really interesting for me. So with no further ado, I'll introduce my colleague, or Johnny, if you can introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Johnny Pears. I'm User Experience Director at MediaWorks. My role sits between our data and insights teams, our design teams and our development teams to ultimately understand how do we create the best user experience for our end user, our customer.
Thanks, Johnny. I think, you know, when we sent out the materials in advance of today, we talked about having a number of topics that we're going to cover. So inevitably, we're going to be structuring the session around that. But what I would like to just highlight in advance is that there is an opportunity for a free digital experience UX audit from Johnny and his team as an outcome of today. So we'll drop that straight into the chat where you can book one-to-one. We are going to cover this for about 30 minutes today, but appreciative of everybody's customer journeys, user experiences on their websites are inevitably different. So we want to just give people the opportunity to draw into the expertise that we've got here at MediaWorks on a more sort of bespoke level. So I'd say if you're interested in that as we go through today, please do sign up. You can do that in the chat, and we'll also share details upon us sending out the recording of the session and all the post session materials. So Johnny, I guess first question for me straight into it is always around defining your website's purpose. We've touched on it slightly as we've gone through the session, as I went through the intro just then. But what, in terms of the primary goal, we often talk about primary and secondary goal on websites, but when we talk about primary goals, what should people be thinking about, and how do you actually start by defining what the primary goal is?
I think the interesting approach to this is taking a real step back into understanding the business goals and needs and KPIs, as well as understanding our audience's needs and goals and KPIs. And then it's finding that right balance that sits in the middle to see how these join up. I think for me, it's understanding a mixture of what are your goals now, but what does that look like in 2 years, 5 years? Yeah. And also it's similarly understanding what your user's going to want in 2 years, 5 years time, and trying to foresee what kind of comes of that. I think there's a mixture of, at that point, trying to understand what a user wants from your platform. And that really is very much a personalized experience. We're moving into a world now that everybody expects an experience to be built around them and their understanding of what they want from a platform, and whether that's something that is useful to them, accessible to them, findable to them, they're able to get there and find what they're looking for, desirable in terms of an outcome, a product, a solution, it's valuable to their day-to-day life or experience, and it's ultimately usable. Yeah. is key to them. So for me, it's understanding that before we can even understand where we want to take that as a longer term thing. I think where we really work quite closely with clients as well is understanding and mirroring a KPI from both sides. So ultimately, if the business, and I use this as an example, wants to reduce calls to a call center, well, actually, there's probably a frustration from our customer on the other side that is having to call a call center. Yeah. So actually, it's what do we do there? Well, it's probably building out self-serve content, expanding that journey out. So for me, there is a key of understanding primary, secondary goals, but actually there's probably a lot of tertiary goals in the middle of that need to be established as well.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things that I know your team work a lot on is also linking that back to the business model of the organisation. I think we have this view, or people looking in often have the view that business is a very simple thing in lots of ways. You've either got customers and you've got, you know, a retail operation, for example, or you're trying to drive leads, but often it's way more nuanced than that, and actually your website's trying to serve a multitude of stakeholders, isn't it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, we run quite a lot of sessions with our clients' workshops trying to understand those customer journeys, but it's not even your direct customer that you may be working closely with there. They might be the decision maker, but it's also decision influencers in that process as well, where people are coming to understand a lot more information around what you do, how you do it, to feed that to somebody in their internal organization that ultimately makes a decision. So it's all around how those journeys fit together, because one goal does not serve all of those people.
Yeah, and I think that's where, to lead into the next question, we talk about research. And I think like research is such a underrepresented or underestimated aspect of all sort of user experiences, in the sense that, like, where do we start when we're thinking about researching a website, its functionality, actually what we're trying to achieve with a website? Because there's multiple data sources out there, aren't there?
Yeah, definitely. So in my eyes, it is having to understand what we want that end goal to be gives us a starting point. But there's also taking a view of the landscape that we have now. Where are we at? Where are we at versus competitors? And in no means do I mean copying what other people do, but where are we at as a benchmark? How are we performing? Where are we at in terms of satisfying our customers? Some of the best data that I get about websites is, like I mentioned before, from a call center.
Yeah.
You get such an opinion of, well, why didn't you use that channel? And it gives you such an insight of, okay, now I can start to see some frustrations and problems. I know the gaps that I need to fill with research.
Yeah.
And really within that, what I'm trying to then understand is, what sort of quant research do I need? What qualitative research do I need? And how do I then start to understand how that maps between a user's behaviors and their attitudes?
Yeah.
So really, and we've got a bit of a scale to kind of show how that all works. It gives us some insight in terms of which pieces of research is going to give us the best methods of understanding what we need to do.
Yeah, because I think one of the challenges when I think about this, Johnny, is often like, when you speak to organizations, they'll often do aspects of this, but actually it's about where does all of that fit together and how does it come together to create the full picture. It's almost like that triangulation piece. It's like not doing it based on one piece of research or one piece of insight. It's actually about stitching that together holistically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the important piece here is that quite often if we speak to an organization, we go and speak to somebody, they do deliver individual pieces of this, but it's the so what?
Yeah.
And it's the really understanding of, well, what does that mean, and finding the opportunity within that. Some of the work, for example, that we do is customer journey mapping, is just a sense of picking one sort of piece of research. It is to understand the lay of the land now with a client. How do we move through that? Where do we contact clients? Where does the shift in ownership come as part of that journey? And what do our processes and systems do in each of those instances? Really, what I'm looking at is the current lay of the land, but what I'm actually trying to find is opportunity.
Yeah.
And where have we had a conversation within this workshop to kind of be, well, actually, we do this manually.
Yeah.
But does it have to be manual? Would that make it a much better experience for the user if we were to make that an automated process? And really, we're spotting that opportunity, and it's giving us an answer that sits outside of necessarily the direct research, but it gives us a motive for, so what's next, and where do we go with that?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really important point around that whole journey mapping piece. And I think, like, we know that sort of there's a multitude of priorities across the website, and it's really important that we sort of keep alignment with key stakeholders. We touched upon it. There's multiple stakeholders when you think of websites. Like, very few websites are just speaking to one particular audience. And, you know, I always say most organizations that we speak to will have different audiences even within one stakeholder group. So even if you talk customers, you might talk about 12 different profiles of customers within that. And I think even that, like, raises questions around, when you said at the beginning, personalization, and the fact that people are expecting a more personalized experience. How do you actually achieve that with all the different stakeholder groups?
So I think for me, it's trying to understand how we start to prioritize some of those sort of really high impact areas of a user's experience. We have to understand who our sort of key stakeholders are within that. It's, yes, there's key stakeholders within the organization of who we're dealing with and how we get that better. Key stakeholders not necessarily always being a CEO or an MD. It is actually the sales team or things like that. Like, how are we building an experience that supports what they're doing and delivering on? Then we have to understand that our end user is also a key stakeholder in that, decision makers, decision influencers, and how we can ultimately create an experience that then focuses on everybody's key end goal and merge that all into one sort of a fixed point. For us, we will often do our research, really understand all aspects of this key user journey, but then it's finding that priority and how we want to implement that as part of the experience. For me, within that, we use tools such as Jira and other sort of means and methods. to use ultimately what we class as the ICE factor. It is looking at impact and confidence versus the effort to implement. So impact can be, is it impactful on the customer's experience? Is it impactful on a key KPI? Is it impactful on our SEO rankings or a paid performance or something like that? If it's positively going to impact, plus we've got confidence internally, we've seen that before, or we feel like, yes, that's how people are going to react and respond, that's great. Versus that effort to implement. We don't want to put a solution in front of a client or in front of key stakeholders that we say, that's going to take you a month to implement that, because ultimately we want quicker results where possible.
Yeah, I think this for me is really interesting, because I think it's almost a reward versus effort model. This, isn't it? Where it's like, if you're going to have to put in lots of energy, effort, and it's only going to move things that much, is it worth doing? And I think when we talk about prioritization, yes, they'll be doing, but it's to do it in a prioritized order, isn't it? Where you're getting biggest bang for your buck. Yeah,
and I think that's the key thing. It's remembering that budget isn't infinite. Like, we have to make sure that we're aligning within budgets. We're going to see a good return on investment for any changes that we recommend or want to implement. A lot of the decisions that we make internally when we're saying to prioritize changes or prioritize key areas of site are very much backed up by the data that goes into that. The amount of research is a key factor for us in confidence building in these situations. If we can start to mirror that and put that into part of our calculation as to why we prioritize things, that's where we should be putting our efforts.
Yeah, I think that leads me on to talk about creativity, Johnny, because I think that one of the things that we often get hung up on often is how something looks, you know. And the reality is, for example, I was down in London recently at a workshop held by LinkedIn, and they were talking about the power of creativity and it as a multiplying factor and its ability to enhance performance on, for example, paid channels or on an organic listing in terms of what they see on LinkedIn. And I think creativity's role in this area can't be underlooked, can it? Because it all plays a part in impact and differentiation.
Yeah, definitely. I think creativity is absolutely crucial as part of the user's experience, in the sense that people want to come to a website that they can relate to, that they want to have a good experience on. I think there's that 59% of users want to see a beautiful experience. It's such a high percentage that is influenced by the creative side of things. I think that for us is why it's absolutely crucial. I mean, any project that I work on, I'll take a view of the user's experience. My background was creative, and I work closely with our creative team in terms of where we go, what we do, because ultimately, like, what do you get from that creative? Well, it's trust. Like, we've all been there, we've all been on a website or been on an experience where we've been on and it's not hitting the mark, and you revert back to your safe space. You revert back to, if you were buying a product online, you revert back to Amazon, because it's easier. It's not the most creative of spaces, but the design is nice enough for you to know how to utilize that, and it guides your thoughts, your processes as you're moving through that in the different ways that it influences you. And I think that's exactly what you get from that creative aspect. You're building trust with your brand, but you're also building trust in the experience.
So I guess the question that would naturally follow on from that would be then, how do you sort of strike the balance between innovation and usability? Because I think there's always a thing where it's like, it can be too out there and too creative, and actually it becomes difficult. I've seen multiple examples of those over the 20 years I've been in industry, where people have done something that's so out there, it's actually slightly ahead of its time sometimes, and people, you see then website performance drop off because people are a bit off-put by it. And from a beautiful website perspective, it might look absolutely amazing, but the practical usability of it might be difficult.
Yeah, there's a law in UX called Jacob's Law that is effectively telling us that people don't like to move away from ultimately their comfort zone. Don't fix what's not broken already. You know, there's a reason that navigation structures are relatively similar in some spaces, and you'll see the e-commerce experiences are roughly the same experience as you move through that, albeit changed creatively. It is because people are used to that experience. You get people to buy into what they're used to, they'll move through that. I think the important piece to understand is, when we're in a space of adding that creativity into things, that's the perfect opportunity for a test and learn and iterate situation.
Yeah.
Going big bang on these sort of things can always be amazing and lead to a bit of a news story around how amazing that is. But also, do we understand the effect that we've just had on somebody who may require additional needs as part of their journey? Have we just completely segmented an audience out of the experience? Are we allowing everybody to engage with this fairly? And I think for me, that's where that test and iteration piece comes in, because we can take that data and understand if we've done the right thing and we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think something that comes to mind when you mentioned that, Johnny, was evolution rather than revolution.
Yeah.
And I think but what I would say is sometimes revolution is actually what's needed. And I think, and I guess I would say, because that might be revolutionary for your business, but probably revolution to bring you up to like industry expectations and industry norms and industry benchmarks. Like if you're at the absolute top end of that in terms of your development and progression as a business and user experience, etc., you are probably looking at those 1%, that evolutionary bit. If you're starting from way back here, actually, it might be massively revolutionary for you to just bring you up to the standard. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's bigger changes will always have a much bigger impact. And you're right, though, I mean, in Formula One, they wouldn't go out and create a whole new car. They do iterative, small 1% changes to take those small gains. But you're absolutely right. And that's where I think that benchmarking piece comes in early on, where you have a look at the lay of the land where you are now is, how far behind am I in terms of what people have become to expect? And for me, if you need to take that big leap, you need to go in with that big bang, because ultimately in that stage you become a bit of a disruptor. Like if people see a new experience, they feel something new, they feel the effort that's put in. Trying to catch up with 1% changes, it's just doesn't work in that sense.
I guess that leads me into then, how do you build with scalability in mind? Because lots of organizations, you know, at the point of inception around building a website, etc., their business will evolve over that period of time, whether that be introducing new products or services or new ways of doing business, etc. Like things do change. So how do you build with that in mind, Johnny?
I think for me, it's understanding the roadmap of where you want to go. So I, again, and as I always do, I take it back to a bit of research, but it's understanding who our audience are, what have they come to expect, and what do we want as an organization to start delivering to our key audience. We've had conversations recently with clients where they're looking to retrofit a new technology into the sort of offering, and that is such a difficult place to be. But had they, as part of their 5-year roadmap, identified that they were going to put an app in place at some point in this journey, or even hypothetically thought about putting an app into that position, they wouldn't have cornered themselves with a specific level of technology that is meaning now that they're having to rebuild parts of this. Like, I think for me, that scalability comes with that forward planning. You don't have a business and not think about what you're doing in 2 years, 5 years in terms of business plan. So why should your experience be any different to that?
Yeah. It's not doing it in isolation, is it? I think it's the key thing is understanding that what you're wanting to put out there from a digital user experience, customer journey perspective is obviously should be reflective in what direction you're taking the business, and making sure those two things are aligned, rather than like the website or the digital experience being sort of the last to know about what's taking place, which can often happen. Yeah,
I think that's the thing. It's making sure that you're not trying to chase your tail in those situations a lot of the time. And I think if you have that forward plan in place and you can start to see how you want a roadmap, that's the difference between the big bang and the 1% wins. I think for me, it's do you go large scale change and have to make some big sort of iteration there, or can you go after those 1% wins and really understand where you're affecting your audience in multiple ways? For me, you wouldn't buy a car and never service it. You wouldn't buy a house and not continually improve the sort of inside of that house. But so for me, the digital experience should be no different. You're paying a large output for a website in those spaces. Like, maintain it, take it on to the next level. For me, it is understanding the research and understand how people are engaging with that, really starting to sort of prioritize some changes that you can make in those spaces, understand solutions, implement that through testing methods which you've touched on, and always reporting back on that impact to understand where you're making those changes.
Yeah, because I think that is the bit often, isn't it, is around upgrade versus overhaul, and at what point you do it. And like you say, the model that you've just taken us through, starting with the research, etc., and then moving right through into things like reporting on impact, is super important for doing that. And I think, again, it sort of links back to where we started around that research piece is so important in terms of things like benchmarking and understanding exactly where you're at to understand where you ultimately want to get to. I guess a follow-up point to that then would be audiences. You know, we've touched on them as we've gone through sort of the session. Inevitably we would. We're a marketing organisation. We're a digital business. We know audiences matter, and getting those right are often the thing that really drive everything else ultimately. So I guess, how does sort of audience behaviour impact sort of website design, functionality, what we're looking to try and implement across a website?
It is the leader in that situation. Everything that we do should be based on our audience's wants and needs, and not internally through what we think they should have. Like, you spend a lot of time, and we do, understanding a business and what they do and what they deliver, but ultimately what I want to do is go out there and speak to our customers and have that conversation. So it's where we look at that sort of quant and qual research to be able to understand en masse what are people doing with our platforms, whether that's through analytics, whether it's through heat map technology, things like that. But I also want to have those conversations with our audience. Then it's working with organizations to map that journey end to end and understand where those influences fit in each stage of that journey. It really then allows us that opportunity to find the opportunity that sits within there. Like I mentioned before, is how do we automate a process? How do we make something easier? How do we cut out a step completely because actually it just adds a layer of frustration to an audience's need? And how do we make sure that we're prioritizing what we need to implement through what they're doing?
Yeah, and I think for me it's about looking as well, when we talk about understanding audiences, it's about looking at that full user experience, isn't it? From moment of, you know, dare I say it, funnel awareness right through to being on the website and converting or engaging or producing some form of action. Ultimately, there's quite a lot of activity that goes in to understand that full journey, isn't there?
Yeah, for me, we can look at that, as you say, the funnel or the circle, in terms of however you kind of want to break that down. For me, we need to look at every stage of that. How is somebody engaging with us? But not just from the digital experience point of view. I need to know what they're doing when they're not engaging with us. Away from that, does opportunity sit there? Does the opportunity actually sit, we don't need them to engage with us as much, we're adding too many steps into this experience, and we're wanting too much from them? So for me, it is looking at each of those sort of key phases, really understanding where and what they need. How do we relate that back to the experience that they are ultimately wanting from a usable, personalized platform? And then we can work back to say, actually, this should be the journey and the experience. Then we can, you know, qualify that by having those conversations and test them with our end user.
Okay, so I guess a final sort of question, if you like, that I've got without heading into the question and answer stage would be sort of, when is the right time then to involve an external partner? And look, let's not kid ourselves, we're a digital agency, that's where often we do come in. But I guess at what point when you're working with organizations do you spot that, or do you think is the right time to think about engaging with an external partner, whoever that may be?
I would always say as early in this process as possible. The thing I like and enjoy doing the most is challenging an organization. Like, we don't want to get to a point where we've defined what we think the experience should be, and here can we have that website, and it's, well, actually, how did we get there? What decisions were made, and how did we consult and use research to get us to that point? So for me, it is right at the start of this conversation, even if it's just from a sort of consultative basis. It's actually understanding what research can you as an organization go out and do yourselves. How can you qualify that? And we can work with somebody to understand those and do. We don't always need to be in the room doing it. And I think it's just so important to have that structure of understanding why we're making the decisions that we're making as we go through that purpose. For me, an agency or a partner or anything like that is going to bring in additional expertise around systems, technologies, ways of working, but also challenge your business to actually say, well, do you need to do that? Or are we expecting a customer to do something that we shouldn't be expecting them to do? And they probably come in with, you know, a lot of different sector knowledge that they could say that actually that's a transferable piece of knowledge into your sector or into your situation or into your industry that we can actually start to then partner and collaborate on a little bit more. I think that's the ultimate piece for me, is like, I don't want to work alongside a business. I want to be part of that business. I want to be in that organization to the extent of like, I am part of their team, because at that point, I have the ability to challenge. I have the ability to understand what we're doing and why are we doing that? Because we've done it for 10 years and that's how we've always done it. Well, actually, that doesn't mean it's the right way to do things.
Yeah, and it really is. I think, you know, we talked about it, it's going back to understanding what's the purpose, isn't it? And then building from there. Whereas I often think people start with a position of oh, our website doesn't look great. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's the total difference with this versus just reskimming a website, if you like, versus actually holistically looking at the digital experience across key stakeholders, etc.
That because that statement, and we do come across it quite a lot, is an opinion.
Yeah.
What you think's good is I might think's bad, and vice versa. That I think it needs to always just take that holistic step back and have a bit of an understanding of, well, actually, what's the research and data going to tell us, and then we can work together to move forward from there.
No, well, thank you very much. I think they're the main questions that we've got. But again, I think I just wanted to reiterate, Johnny, that what we're offering as well to people who've joined us today is that free audit, so free digital experience UX audit. As I say, it will include things like performance insights, a review of key journeys and initial recommendations, very top level, but definitely something to get people thinking and to have the opportunity to bounce ideas off you, talk through where they're at in their own particular journey, and really just get that initial expert input, I think, is what we're offering. Yeah,
definitely. I think it will always be a bit of an outside looking in view.
Yeah.
But I think if it can just even spark a conversation or a thought or something we need to maybe look into down the line within an organization, fantastic. That's exactly what we want to do.
Yeah, and I'm really conscious of time, and I know we've only got 2 or 3 minutes, but I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask really, Johnny, was around, I guess, how do you think people should approach sort of, when we're thinking about user experience and website sort of development and developing digital approaches, sort of, what do you think are the key triggers for knowing that you're at the point where you should be thinking about this?
I think for me, it's taking that step back. I think it's finding the right reason to make that change. I think everything should be backed up by a little bit of data and a bit of understanding. I think there's always going to be a key trigger point, whether that is a business has changed its view and outlook, a 5-year plan changes, we're moving into new sectors or new industries. There is always some big change that can always drive into this. But I think there's always that looking at other aspects of, is the platform working hard enough? It's a key tool, if not the most important tool. It sits on your list of actually driving conversion and driving sales or contacts within your business. Is it working hard enough for you? Effectively, if they were an employee, would you be happy with their delivery within the business?
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point where sort of you just mentioned it there, Johnny, though, where it's like, would you be happy with it? But I also think when you stripped it back at the start of that, and you were talking about change at a business level, I think, like, previously, as I say, I think you'd often find that sort of digital was in essence an afterthought for a lot of businesses when they were doing business planning, business modeling, commercial modeling, you know, financial year planning, etc. It was like, right, the output of that will be something that informs digital. I think what we're seeing, and we have seen over the last 5 years, whether that be driven incredibly by COVID, ultimately ramping up the reliance on digital and how people engage with digital solutions. I think now it's more about thinking about that as a real sort of, as part of that,
aspect,
not in isolation as an output, but actually, right, how is this going to be impacted by as an absolute, whether it's a key channel to speak to customers, stakeholders, etc., or whether it's actually how you do business fundamentally through your digital platforms.
Yeah, definitely. That digital platform is absolutely, and that digital experience end to end is so critical as part of how business are run day to day now. It's no longer just a tool that might help a sale, it is a fundamental part of the majority of businesses, especially around brand and sort of how people are, the affinity people have with your brand and how they deal with you as a business. I think absolutely critical, yeah.
Well, again, conscious of time, I think we've absolutely sort of maximised that in terms of timings being pretty perfect. Again, thank you very much for your time, Johnny. It's been really brilliant to have you on the sofa and to be speaking with us about these topics. Again, just to reiterate, there is follow-up opportunities. We've shared it in the chat. We'll also be sharing it on the follow-up coming out of the session. But I guess all that's left to say is thank you very much for joining us today. I hope it's proved insightful and you've taken many notes and actions away from this session. Again, think about the follow-up, and I obviously look forward to seeing you next month in another MediaWorks Masterclass session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.